I'd first of all like to say, thanks to Hans for a very great presentation just before the break. Also, it's a bit problematic that you kind of undermined some of the points that I'll be coming here with in a second, because what I'll be arguing in this presentation is that for changing towards PSS, you will inevitably run into a lot of problems. That's, of course, a modified truth. And these problems can be seen as internal and external. Obviously, the actual situation is that certain companies will be faced with massive internal issues, challenges, and other companies will be faced with external issues and challenges. And what I'll be doing, as Tim said, is I'll start out by talking a little bit about the organizational issues in changing towards PSS, and then my colleague Tom will take over and talk a little bit about the partnership issues. So let's jump into it. We tried to figure out what it actually takes to transition to a PSS strategy or to a PSS-based business model, and to do so, we quickly realized that companies like Danilec, Viking, and there are some other examples in the maritime branch. They're not that many of these companies, perhaps because it's been a somewhat conservative branch historically. So what we did, and this is something that we presented at our conference earlier this year in March, we looked to some other industries for cases. And what we did is we looked at 3 cases. One was MAN Truck and Bus in the UK. One was GKN Aerospace, Volvo Aerospace, and the other one was BASF, who do coding for cars. And what we saw in all of these cases was that, they took their time. All of these cases actually took more than 10 years to, they were traditionally product-centric companies, and they transitioned into a servitized business, and it took approximately 10 years for each of these companies. And that's probably, that's a pretty big contrast to what Hans was saying before. But imagine, for instance, which one was it I pressed for the laser? For the left? Okay. What we realized, I actually don't know why I need the laser right now, but it's just good to know. So let's just leave it at that. But the thing is that if you look at a company like MAN Truck and Bus, for a long time, their main competence, their main skill was to deliver excellent products, excellent trucks. And what you actually saw in that organization was that I think about 90% of the management was completely changed in order to accommodate this completely new business paradigm that they were entering into. So I would say that's a pretty extensive incision into the organization. So and also we say that it takes 10 years. Obviously, very few companies, except for maybe at this point Rolls-Royce with current liquidity, can handle 10 years without profit. So it goes without saying that each step in this change process needs to be profitable. You need to roll it out sequentially, and you need to figure out, what are the stepping stones you can walk on in order to reach this future that you want to end up in. Okay, so still, what can you do to mitigate the time it takes to change and mitigate the challenges that you will be faced with in the process of changing? Well, it goes without saying that for that to be possible, for you to mitigate the problems, the challenges, you need to have a proper understanding of what this change actually involves. And that's why I'm here. So let's see what we can tell you about the process of changing towards a PSS business. Well, the first thing that we've been looking at is the organization itself. What happens in the organization? Everyone is used to looking at a hierarchy in an organization where you have the management on top, and you have some different supervisors, and you have the different departments. We generally like to have management placed as sort of visually a centric part of the organization from which there are direct lines of communication to all the other organs of the organization. One very important part, important attribute of the PSS organization is that, and at this point that should probably go without saying, is that it's completely centered around the user. So that means, speaking of culture and things like that, the first, the last, and the only priority when you develop a new offering should be how this is seen as valuable in the eyes of the user. Another part is that you'll probably realize that departments that usually didn't work together could be, on the one hand, you have the development department, on the other hand, you have human resources, it could be the service department, which, in many cases has traditionally been a separate instance or a separate silo, if you will, within the company. These departments suddenly need to be much better at working together. The third part also goes without saying. Everyone who knows a little bit about strategy knows that you need to have a consistent culture, a consistent set of priorities and understandings across the whole organization. The thing is that, well, in a normal value logic, in a normal company, by a normal company I mean a company that, for instance, supplies products, well, engineering has a big say and everyone is very focused on, the value or the quality of the products. For instance, in the man, truck and bus case, suddenly it wasn't engineering who were the most important people in the organization. Suddenly everyone had to align to someone else. Actually, that was the service department suddenly, because they were the ones who actually knew how value was created with the customer. So that obviously can pose challenges. And lastly, it doesn't make sense to veer off in some direction and pursue a beautiful business model if you don't base your single steps and your different decisions on data. So and again, the user is centric, but it's not enough to just be centered on the user. It's also very important to understand how the data gathered with the user can be used and leveraged in changing your organization. So that's sort of the outcome part. So how do you actually get to these organizations? What we've done is we've taken something that was already on the shelf, yet another tool, you might say. It's a 7-step change framework that I'll run through rather quickly now because it's probably rather easy to understand the main points of it, and I suggest that you consult the book on the issue to get a deeper understanding. But what we've done is that we've taken this framework and we've tried to look into, for each of these stages, for each of these steps, where does the PSS stuff fit in? How is this specific to PSS? And I'll just quickly run through the stages so that you can get an understanding of what is happening. Well, I forgot to press the thing a few times here. Well, the first and the obvious one, the thing that starts any change process is, the exploration of opportunities. What is out there? What can we do as an organization? Often you would see in a company that someone was appointed to be like a champion, someone to conduct the research into the organizational issues, maybe into the market issues, determining which strategy one should pursue in, let's say, 5 years out, 5 years from now. The next part, of course, is to convince the management that this is actually a good idea. This seems, like a simple thing to do, but as I said, in the case of man, truck, and bus, a pretty big part of the management wasn't actually agreeing with the fact that this was a good strategy that we were pursuing. So I don't know exactly how that process unfolded, but someone must have made a decision that we're doing it anyway, and perhaps that's why it took so long. But there's also sort of a two-way interaction there, because in many cases you would have to also look, have another look at the strategy and realize, is this strategy actually one that management has a belief in? Is this a strategy that we can roll out with the current leadership and the current understanding of what we are as a business? So, moving on. Well, in the initiate phase, you obviously have to figure out how do you actually roll this out in the company. And this means finding the right people. You often see that in these initial phases, not the initiate phase, but in the phase called explore, that you've been talking to different parts of the company. Maybe you've identified a person here, there, and here that could be the first person we should make turn into a champion for that department. Someone who could sort of be a beacon or a guiding light for how to implement product PSS thinking in that particular department. So that's very crucial. And again, this is apparently something that we preach a lot, because I've surely written it a lot of times, but just make sure that these different changes that you are supposing or proposing, that you also have measures for actually establishing whether they've happened or whether you're progressing in the right direction towards these measures. There's a very funny idea that my colleague Line uncovered about a manager in a company, and I have a sense that maybe we told this at the last conference, so forgive me if I repeat it. A manager in a company, he found out new metrics. He invented new metrics, and he knew very well that these metrics, they would fail miserably. So when he applied them to his company, everyone was like, oh my God, we're going to crash. The business model is killing us, if you will. And obviously that definitely motivated the employees, because they realized, well, if we don't do this, then I'm out of a job. Well, you could have said that maybe it was the wrong metrics, but it was definitely an effective way of doing it. So I don't have too much time left, so I'll try to jump a bit quicker through this. And sure, we've just initiated the process of change, but before you start running down the field, it's so important that you figure out where you start out. Because if you don't have a proper understanding of what are the internal processes, what are the capabilities, how are we doing things right now, how are we communicating, if you don't figure that out, how the heck are you going to figure out where to change and how to change? So that's, you could say, the initial stage of any change process after you've initiated it. So moving forward, you now have this knowledge of what the organization currently looks like. You also have an idea of where you want to end up. You have the strategy, you have the desired outcome, if you will. Then you can start redesigning and figuring out how to reframe these processes, redesign the processes to enable this new business model, this new strategy. And of course, after that, you launch the whole thing. Suddenly the whole organization becomes very much aware that stuff is happening. A lot of the engineers will be thinking, why am I not just looking at screws anymore? And a lot of the service personnel will be thinking, why do I need to talk to engineering? This is obviously the most hectic and the most crucial time for any change process, and for that reason it also needs to be managed and coordinated very, very closely, again using metrics. And then there's the last point, which I think is pretty important. So I'll linger a little bit with this, the maintain part, because I would argue, and I think there's solid evidence for that argument, I would argue that one of the main favorable characteristics of a PSS-oriented organization is its ability to constantly change. Because what is a PSS organization if not an organization that's able to constantly adapt to whatever the customer or the market is requesting? So if you've established a culture of change, maintain that culture. So that's pretty much what I had to say about the organization. And what I'll do now is pass the mic, as it were, to my colleague Tom, who will be telling you about the partnership part. Let's give it a try.
Thank you.
Oh, you need this one as well. And you need this one.
Let me see. There you go. Found it first time. So my name's Thomas Howard. I'm an Associate Professor at the section of Engineering, Design and Product Development, working very closely with Tim. My other research area is robust design, which is basically designing products so that their performance and their lifetime is quite predictable. And we can see how the areas of robust design and PSS mix quite closely together through Hans's presentation earlier. But since the start of Proteus, I've been working very closely with Tim on the Proteus in various work packages, one of them being this workbook on PSS networks and partnerships, where I've had the pleasure of working with Christina and the pain of working with Jakob, who have both made big contributions to this, which I'm presenting as well. So I'll start off by giving you some interesting figures. So this is just to put you in the perspective that delivering a PSS as a network is not a novelty. In a survey in 2007 by the Economist Intelligence Unit, surveyed 315 manufacturing companies. And of those, 107 of them had at least 30 external manufacturing partners. So, I mean, when you think about that, a manufacturing firm is relying on at least 30 external manufacturing firms in order to deliver the product that they're producing. In addition to that, 63 of them, about a fifth, relied on at least 30 external design partners. So when you actually look at this, the network is a big part of delivering a product service system, certainly in the manufacturing sector as a whole, and it is probably true for the maritime sector as well. So moving on, if we take for granted, or if we understand that being part of a network is important for delivering a PSS, and we want to move towards a PSS, one thing that we can say for certain is we need to move away, as has been said several times, from a product-centric view to looking and focusing on the activities and supporting activities. Then we have to also understand that when we're trying to support a user's activities, there are a number of other stakeholders probably trying to support that same activity. So there may be a lot of opportunities there. Just to put this into a diagram format, we can see here is a user activity, and then we may be these discrete manufacturing units or product providers, each with our own product, but we're all basically supporting this single activity. Now, there are two strategies which we can work together to deliver a common activity or service. The first one's a pretty obvious one, it's a market pull. So we may know a customer wants a particular service, and we may start trying to deliver towards that, but then it's probably the case you'll realise we haven't got all the competencies and we haven't got all the criteria to meet this service or activity. So we've got a few options. We can either decide, okay, we'll leave this customer and we'll try something else. We can try to invest and expand our competencies beyond what we can currently deliver, or we can go into partnerships with others and try to deliver it in a collaborative manner. The other one that came out, which was interesting from the Proteus project, was this idea of capability push. So a number of workshops, a few of the companies from Proteus were asked to come together and just think about their competencies and what they can deliver and see, can they actually provide new service offerings to the customers out there, not necessarily being pulled from the market, but saying, if we put all our capabilities together, what can we possibly offer? One of the things we saw, particularly in Christina's research, was that a lot of the companies, or a lot of the ideas regarding network collaboration, were trying to deliver an activity that was already there, but working together on the back end to make it more efficient and cost effective to deliver the same activity. Now, I'm just going to run through three cases here, which I know a number of you are very familiar with, but we think they exemplify what it is to do a networked PSS. And each one of those is broken down into several headings. What is their motivation for doing it? How did they get started? What was their solution? And how did they execute the plan? So the first one, which you all should know about, is the Green Ship of the Future project, which was a network created by Aalborg, Maersk, MAN Diesel and Odense Shipyard. And this was basically off the back of the COP15 summit, where it was realised that actually the maritime business has quite a large environmental footprint, and maybe we should do something about it. Maybe there's actually an opportunity in doing something about it. So that was the motivation driving it. How they actually went about it was just to create a basic platform to put up projects which they thought were absolutely fundamental in addressing the challenge of the environmental footprint. The solution was an open and voluntary solution. So no funding was put up for each of the individual projects. No companies were assigned to them. It was done on an open basis where companies could voluntarily sign up to the individual projects to get them sorted. And in terms of execution, we realised that there was actually a shift during this initiative from a product-orientated manner to a product service orientated manner. So to start with, the focus was on making the technology more greener, and by the end it was much more customer centric, where they were focusing on delivering greener solutions to a particular type of ship or vessel. The second case is the retrofitting case, and again we have these four main headlines. First of all, the motivation, again from a sustainability point of view, was the International Maritime Organization was releasing some regulations that could potentially be quite damaging towards the Danish maritime industry if you're not prepared and ready for them. So this was kind of a proactive way to prepare for these regulations. And that was along with the fact that it was a very relatively young fleet of ships. So it wasn't a solution to start designing new, more sustainable ships, because the other ones, the ones currently in the system, already have a long service life ahead of them. So we can't simply scrap those and produce more sustainable ones. We have to retrofit new sustainable solutions to those ships. So to get the ball rolling, to get it started, they produced some work packages facing the regulations, so trying to tackle each regulation. And Dansk Maritime were basically hosting this or initiating this project, and they actually provided some mappings between the different retrofit offerings and the suppliers who could potentially provide them. The solution was a web portal where not only did it suggest certain suppliers, but it also suggested component providers and other service providers who could help towards these retrofit projects. And in terms of the execution, they found it was important to promote competition. So although they could suggest service providers who can actually deliver the complete retrofit solution, it was important to leave it open to external competition as well. And the final case, which we'll run through quickly, is the academies case. So the motivation here was basically the motivation behind the Proteus project, to get the maritime industry ready for the transition between a product-orientated industry to a more service-orientated industry. And how they actually got started was, is this correct? No. I think something's gone wrong with some of the text here on the Dropbox. But basically, so ignore the text on the screen, just listen to what's coming out of my mouth. So basically how it started was a Proteus workshop, or series of Proteus workshops, getting these two companies, PrimeServe and Alfa Laval, together to conceptualize what could a shared platform for an academy be. Just to give it, sorry, there's a couple of slides missing in the transition, but this academy is actually up and running now, and also is the Alfa Laval version. But the interesting thing is how they've, since the Proteus workshops, how they've coordinated their activities to focus on shared customer feedback and shared strategies for customer feedback, but also shared knowledge exchange throughout running these academies. Now, those are retrospective views on some successful cases of networked collaboration, but if you want to start from this point forward, well, you can either go the route that we took during Proteus, which is bring a couple of companies together with complementary competencies and just have a couple of days workshop and see what you can come up with, which actually seemed quite productive. But if you want to be a little bit more systematic about it, we've got a few-step process, which could be you identify commercial opportunities to begin with, you clarify the required capabilities in order to deliver on those opportunities, identify where are we falling short in terms of our competencies of our company, then identify partners within our network who could actually potentially deliver on those, and then, very importantly, develop the incentives. Why would it be interesting for both parties to co-deliver a particular service? And then very much in line with Jacob's presentation a moment ago, expect change and capitalise on it. One of the things about delivering a product service system as a network is you're slightly more robust to change, and you're drawing on many different competencies and many different potential configurations. If you're delivering a whole product service system on your own, you're much more susceptible to changes in the market environment. So actually delivering a product service system as a network, you're a lot more adaptable to change. Of course, there are some issues with it. I won't dwell on those. But here was a very nice presentation from the, I think it was Alan Rasmussen, from Torm, from the previous Proteus conference, who made an extremely bold statement. This was a picture of his presentation saying, as a customer, he's completely open now to partnerships. And are you suppliers ready for it? Thank you very much.